Hello, I'm here to read another chapter from my book, Lessons from Life. We're up to the part in the Sermon on the Mount where Maurice is going through the studies that Jesus taught, and he's come to the part where it says, take no thought for food. That's from Matthew chapter 6. Sodom was a very wicked city, but that wickedness was the consequence of a root. Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister, Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. That's taken from Ezekiel 16 verse 49. There's no mention here of homosexuality or violence. These were the consequences. The root causes were indulgent eating, luxurious materialism, and excess leisure time. We see the exact same roots in Western society today, with the exact same consequences. Paul knew that food offered to idols wouldn't defile the heart, and Daniel knew it too. But Daniel also knew that covetousness, the desire for rich food, luxury, status and privilege, would defile the heart. Given the opportunity to live luxuriously and indulgently, he refused and deliberately asked for a simple lifestyle. It's not rich food that's wrong. It's the desire of the heart which makes us crave these things. Jesus said that what goes into our mouth doesn't defile us. It's what comes out, because what goes in cannot touch the heart. But what comes out reveals what's in the heart. I have a question for you. Are you defiling your temple? I was at one of our joint house group fellowship meetings one weekend when I overheard someone complain because she tasted sugar in her coffee. As she said, she absolutely hated it. I told the woman that I was very surprised at this, as I knew for a fact that she loved anything sweet. So on hearing this, one of the younger women said to me, but you don't like sugar in your tea or coffee, Joanna. Yes, but that's because I discipline myself, not because I don't like it, was my reply. I then shared with her my love of cakes, ice cream, chocolate, everything that's bad for you, but that I have to exercise strong discipline not to overindulge. She knew all about these cravings and said that she really found it difficult to be disciplined in this area, especially as she had 2 young children whom she had to cook for. I think food is one of the hardest areas to be disciplined in. It's not like sex, drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes, which can be abstained from completely if we have a strong enough will to do so and a real sincere desire to succeed. It's essential to eat and drink to stay alive. And therein lies our problem. Our choice is not whether we eat or not, it's what we eat and how much. And this is especially difficult for people living in the West, where there is such an abundance of choice and, sadly to say, so much waste. You know, animals don't seem to have the same problem that we humans have. The crocodile kills for his meal, but after he's eaten sufficiently, he can open his jaws and let the birds pick scraps from his teeth without presenting any threat to them. He'll only kill again when he's hungry. But we're not like this. Certain foods that we eat actually create a craving and an addiction, and we can keep on eating them whether we're hungry or not. We just have an unquenchable urge to eat. Chocolate is one of the worst culprits. And we only have to look around at the number of fat and obese people in our Western society to see how many have problems in this particular area. When my son Isaac was about 6 years old, he found out that the powdered cream his dad put in his coffee was really tasty. And he'd take spoonfuls out of the jar and eat it neat. He knew his dad would tell him off if he caught him, so he worked out a plan to eat it secretly. Unfortunately for Isaac, when Maurice was getting his coffee from his office drink station, he noticed this trail of white powder on the carpet and decided to follow it all the way down the stairs to the bathroom. And there he found Isaac with a freshly washed face, but white powder covered his t-shirt. He asked Isaac if he'd been nicking the coffee creamer. Well, Isaac's eyes looked everywhere but his dad's face as he said, as innocently as he possibly could, no. But his dad knew, and his dastardly deed had been found out. When Tamar was about 4, she was also in a similar situation. As a special treat, Isaac had bought for himself, out of his own pocket money, a multi-pack of chocolate biscuits, intending to savour them over the next week or so. When Tamar saw them, she immediately wanted one, and Isaac very generously obliged her. Well, after a few hours later, I noticed that Tamar had been missing for quite some time, so I went looking around the house for her. The toilet door was shut, so I knocked on it and asked if Tamar was inside. She was, but there was a silence from inside the little room, which sounded a bit different somehow. Well, I pushed the door to find her sitting on the loo, munching something very quickly. Her mouth was covered in chocolate, and the floor was littered with Kit Kat wrappers. She looked so guilty, her eyes wide aghast that she'd been caught red-handed. "Have you been eating Isaac's Kit Kats?" I asked her. "No," was her reply. And again, this little criminal had been caught. I had to discipline her for her own good, but I understood entirely what she was battling with. I didn't let her see my face, but I had to laugh at her misdemeanours. After all, she had my genes in her, poor thing. I didn't have to answer to anyone concerning my own particular problems in this area anymore, but I still found it almost impossible to eat just one chocolate from a packet or box without having to finish the lot off completely. When I first left home at 16 years of age to live in a flat, I had an extremely low income. Bills like rent, electricity, gas, tithes, etc., they took priority, and what remained was spent on food. It's quite amazing how cheaply you can live if you don't mind not having a varied diet. I didn't have the luxury of a fridge, so many things had to change. For instance, I had to use powdered milk, as fresh milk would have gone sour waiting to be used up. Crisp breads replaced regular bread as it didn't go mouldy quickly. The lady at church who prepared the communion used to give me the bread which was left over, so I was able to enjoy baked beans in tomato sauce on real toast for my Sunday lunch. Delicious. I wasn't so fortunate with the sausages though. I'd buy a pack of 8 skinless sausages and use 2 sausages for a meal. By the time I got down to the last 2, they were quite furry, so I washed and fried them very well and said a long grace over them to make sure that they were sanctified and edible. I may have eaten very frugally, but I was extremely healthy and never even bothered to register with a doctor until I caught the flu about 10 years later. And even afterwards, I only saw a doctor when I was pregnant or giving birth. The fact that I could only afford basic rather than luxury foods had its own compensations. I began to lose the puppy fat, which I'd always thought of as my big build. And underneath it all, I was surprised to find that I only had a small frame. I lived alone for 10 years in a flat and took on board the philosophy that I should only eat when I felt hungry. When meal times came around, I'd ask myself if I was really hungry, and if I wasn't that particularly bothered about eating, then I would wait until I was. I became very undisciplined and didn't have a regular mealtime pattern, which meant that when I was busy I could go all day without eating, but when I was bored or had time on my hands at weekends, I'd eat anything I could get my hands on, which caused me to do everything possible to make sure that I was always busy. I suppose it was inevitable. The more weight I lost, the more notice people took of me, especially the opposite sex, and my appearance became very, very important to me. When I was plump, men would make crude comments about the size of my rear or chest, but the smaller I became, I found that their gaze lifted until it reached my face, and it was a very satisfying and wonderful experience to find men actually looking into my eyes when they spoke with me, instead of ogling at my well-endowed body. I began to feel feminine, womanly, and grown up. My real problems started when I began to live by faith and work voluntarily for the church. Because I wasn't earning a wage anymore, God provided me with sponsors who took me into their own home and treated me as part of their family. I always felt in their debt, so I did as much as I could to make myself useful, baking cakes and other fancy foods to last through the coming week. I wasn't used to regular, proper meals, and before long I noticed the weight beginning to creep on again, much to my dismay. Then one evening, something happened. I was eating the Saturday evening chippy supper when one of the chips got stuck in my throat, and even now I don't know how on earth that was possible. And it seemed to rip the lining of my throat. Well, I was coughing for ages trying to get up the offending fragment of food, but it was resistant. With my eyes streaming and my coughing continuous, I retired to bed, lying down with my mouth open as saliva was pouring out so quickly that I couldn't swallow fast enough to get rid of it. Eventually, I thought of making myself sick in the hope that it would bring up the offending blockage. Almost as soon as I put my hand in my mouth, I vomited up the blockage together with what looked like everything else that I'd eaten during that whole day. And I was amazed at how quickly my stomach had reacted. I went to bed feeling very empty and my throat very sore. But that one action had triggered something off in my mind. I don't know how soon it was after this initial event, but the next time I felt as though I'd overindulged with my eating, I remembered how easily I'd brought back my food by making myself sick, so I did it again. I began to enjoy that really empty feeling, especially as it meant that if I overate at any time, I could be sick and it wouldn't make any difference to my size. The problem was that I didn't limit being sick to times when I'd overeaten. I'd be sick after family meals, and eventually it became the routine thing to do after everything I ate. My situation changed and I took up full-time employment again. The more weight I lost, the more confident I felt. The bathroom scales, they now took a prominent place in the bedroom, and I was on them at the very least once a day. I got a great thrill out of buying really small sizes in clothes and laughed when people said that I'd gone too skinny, thinking that they were just secretly jealous of the fact that I'd lost loads of weight when they were really struggling so hard themselves. I'd look into every shop window I came across, not necessarily to view the goods that they were displaying, but to see my reflection and make sure my proportions were as I desired them to be. When I was at my senior school, I'd been awfully conscious about my size. The teachers would shame me into standing in front of everybody to sing solos for the school, saying that I should feel honoured to be picked to represent them. My voice wasn't the problem. I knew I could sing, but I'd always been terribly embarrassed when I caught sight of myself in that hideous school uniform. The white shirt and the tie tucked into the navy blue pleated skirt looked gross and didn't do a thing to enhance my shape. But now that I'd lost so much weight, I enjoyed standing in public. Clothes began to matter, and I wore the tightest, figure-hugging fashions available, which would show off my tiny waist and slim legs, and would let the minister know in no uncertain terms that I was extremely insulted when he suggested I should tone my dress code down when ministering on the platforms of churches. No matter how slim I became, I never reached the point where I was content. I became paranoid about gaining weight. People began to worry about my weight loss, not just women at work who were mad jealous of me because I was receiving so much male attention, but people who really loved me and were concerned for me. My minister in particular made a point of praying earnestly for me and tried on several occasions to broach the subject of food and eating properly. But for some reason I was extremely defensive and sensitive and would not enter into any sort of conversation concerning my health or diet, even though by this time things were getting way out of control and my health was beginning to suffer. I began to notice my vision blurring, my teeth loosening, and instances where I was on the point of fainting in public places. But even these occurrences didn't frighten me enough to control what had now become a dangerous habit. But God's very good. Sometimes we won't ask for help until we're so desperate and broken that we realise we actually need it. I remember one occasion when I was out shopping with a male friend. By this time, my stomach had become so weakened that I couldn't take tea or coffee, and I was just drinking water. We were in a cafe and he ordered something to eat and drink, and I just asked for a glass of water. I only had a sip when I felt an urgency to rush to the toilets to be sick. It was awful. We walked out of the cafe and I began to vomit involuntarily in the street, right there in front of passers-by, and I just couldn't control myself. I felt so embarrassed. This happened on a couple of occasions, and I realised that my habit had gone way too far. You know, it's one thing to make yourself sick, but it's completely different when your body begins to automatically reject food and drink. A situation like that results in death. I'm ashamed to say that even as a Christian, I'd always secretly desired a disease that would make me slim. But now that I had anorexia, bulimia, I felt scared, and thank God. Shortly after this incident, I was mercifully at the home of the minister with him and some members of his family. We were having friendly conversation until things began to get a little bit personal. My eating disorder was mentioned. I immediately got defensive. I fought off the advice and help that was being offered, as I had done on so many occasions in the past. But this time, I was weakened by the fact that I'd had a few scares to make me think seriously about what was happening to me. Eventually, I told the minister that if it was a point of real concern to him, then he could pray for me. Well, he acted quickly on this license I'd given him, and he stood up and he laid his hands on my head. As soon as his hands were in place, I saw a vision in my mind of a devil sitting in the pit of my stomach, eating everything that came down my gullet. And it was laughing. And in an instant, I knew that this devil wanted to destroy God's plan for my life and would kill me to do it. Prior to seeing this devil, I'd been under the impression that being sick had been my idea. But now I realised that it had been a fiendish and sinister deception. Something rose up inside me, and I wanted to fight back at this evil that had taken control of my life. For the very first time, I wanted to be rid of this satanic influence that I'd secretly desired. I began to pray in tongues as the minister had his hands on my head praying for me. And once again, I felt that familiar desire to be sick. But this time, as I got up and rushed to his sink to vomit, I saw in a vision that this devil was being vomited up out of my stomach, and God completely delivered me. Do you know? If we lived the way God intended us to live, we'd never have to worry about food, the lack of it, or the abundance of it. It's interesting to note that when God provided food supernaturally, like he did for the children of Israel with manna, Elisha and the cruse of oil and meal, and so on, God didn't think of giving a varied diet, only the basic necessities to pacify the hunger. Jesus said, take no thought for what you eat or drink. In other words, don't place so much importance on it. Food is to keep you alive. We don't have to pamper to the flesh just because we have the money to be able to buy those luxuries that we enjoy so much. What about keeping someone else alive with the money that we would spend on our indulgences? God knows there are millions in the world starving to death, whilst we concern ourselves with looking at the labels to buy foods with fewer calories, less fat, or whether they've been organically grown. Well, that's my 2 pennyworth, and I hope it's made you think. God bless you.